Hi, I'm Click on Fire, and since I got my 3D printer, I love modeling and printing stuff to improve my studio. The 3D printer I received is the Ender-3, and in my opinion, it is still one of the best 3D printers in terms of quality-price ratio that can be found on the market. Not only is it quite easy to assemble, but the huge advantage is that there is a large community of people who regularly post 3D models to modify or improve a little anything and everything. So obviously, once I got my 3D printer and I finished assembling it, one of the first things I tried to do was print stuff to improve and optimize it. And of course I got a little carried away to begin with, a bit of personalization. When you buy a 3D printer, and especially an Ender-3, basically there is a kind of QR code on the side that we all end up removing because we are not going to lie to ourselves. Actually, it's not very pretty. So one of the first things I necessarily printed is a cache that covers the black part behind the QR code. Honestly, there really is one for every taste and for every 3D printer model, and it's pretty fast to print. Add something unique to your printer to give it your personality. Well, then we will continue with some basic improvements for your 3D printer. In this episode, we will mainly see improvements that you can print yourself with your printer, and especially that you can easily add to your 3D printer. If, like me, you have your 3D printer in the same room where your bed is, you will surely have noticed that the screen is very bright. And for people who are light sleepers, honestly, I think you will have trouble sleeping because of this light. Fortunately, there are several ways to solve this problem in a very simple and fast way. Most of the solutions I found on the internet, you go into a kind of hood that opens and closes to cover the screen. On the other hand, be careful in the direction in which the cover opens, because I noticed that on some 3D models, the cover do called the cover X of the XX of the 3D printer, if the cover remained open. You have to be very careful in the sense that it can break your machine. Personally, I admit that I was looking for that. I chose in the most. It can work. That I admit that person. I admit that little very, that I admit that I admit that. I admit that 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 I share. We just hid the screen, and then simply in fact I can put it away when I don't use it. The second improvement, and which for me is surely one of the most important. And honestly, I don't even understand why the manufacturer doesn't provide you with this part when you buy a 3D printer. It's the back cover of the LCD screen of your 3D printer. Here too, you can find a multitude of different models on several websites, and personally, I chose for a design again very simple. To set it up is also very easy, just loosen a few screws. To be able to put it at the back of the screen and refuse everything on the machine in hood sauce, we will simply protect your LCD screen against all dust, but also avoid the aging too fast of your components and protect it against possible small shocks. Personally, I printed it in black so it stays much more discreet and makes it look a bit like an original piece. To finish the improvements around the LCD screen, I also printed this small cover and these small clips that will allow me to make a nice cam management under the tray of the 3D printer. But especially to prevent the cables from getting caught in the tray, I put clips on the right part, simply so that the cable has a minimum of freedom, so that it is not too constrained and it is not damaged too fast. I also printed the same little clips, so I could hold the power cables on the other side of the machine. This will also allow these cables to get caught in the tray. Namely that there is even a special piece to hold this little piece and really do something clean. I admit that at the beginning I did not necessarily intend to do much for the cab management of the machine, honestly, because I find that the basic one is already quite well done and I did not see where it could be a real problem. Except that by doing some research, I realized quite easily that many people had problems with their cable management, and generally they had left the basic cam management. As you can see, his printer printed a part directly with the management cable inside, and I admit I'm a little wondering how he managed to get it out to fix this problem. I have a Model 3 which allows me to bring together all my cables in a fairly clean way, and which will also allow me to hide everything a little. I was making a model that I think everyone already knows, and that I find rather so ugly. As with the other 3D models, I would put the link in description. It looks like a lot of pieces were needed, but really I just had to do 3 prints for a total of about 10 HRs. The 3D model is also well made in the sense that it is divided into 2 parts, one part that slips on the cable, and the other part that simply closes the management cable. There are various 3D models available for neat cable management. I found it easy to install without needing to remove any screws, and the result looks neat. I noticed that on my 3D printer model, the circuit fan opening is on the top, which I think is pretty dangerous. Honestly, we could have little pieces of plastic falling inside that could damage our entire ventilation system. So to avoid any problem, look for a 3D model to offset the ventilation of the system, and also to slightly reduce the noise of the fan. Again, there are really a lot of templates depending on your 3D printer and the result you want. I will surely put some in description of the video on YouTube, but pay attention to the dimension because I admit that I would print some first. In fact, it's on my plate. Luckily, I realized this before starting a print because there too, it could have totally broken my machine to install the 3D model I chose, and it was pretty easy. It just took me to unscrew 2-3 screws, position my 3D print correctly, and screw everything back together. From time to time, depending on the 3D material you are going to print, there may be some small debris that falls off the tray and lodges in the small holes right next to the ventilation. We are not going to lie, it's quite a hassle to recover and clean. So to avoid this kind of problem, find a small basic 3D model. It will simply fill the grooves and prevent the plastic from being housed in this place. There you print them in different sizes, different colors, and for all 3D printers it will really depend on your taste. But personally I chose to print only those of the front and in black so that it remains quite discreet. For installation, again, it is very simple. There are again 2-3 screws to remove. You install them and you, like most people who have a 3D printer, I use this famous spatula to remove my 3D prints from my tray. Since this is a tool I use a lot, and very regularly, I'm always too lazy to put it in the drawer and it always ends up hanging around a bit anywhere next to my 3D printer. So I decided to print this tiny piece and that will allow me to put my spatula just above the power supply. And the advantage is that it is a little bit hidden, but especially proximity as soon as I need it. As with the spatula, one of the tools we use the most in 3D printing, the small USB stick. That we keep leaving it lying around all over the machine and I always end up losing it or looking for it for 10 minutes. So to solve this problem, at first I had printed a really very basic thing that slipped right next to my ventilation and that allowed me to store my USB key. But between us, it was one of my first achievements and it wasn't very solid. So for this video, I preferred to print you a new model. It comes to put on the side of the LCD screen and that will allow me to store my USB drive once I use it more and avoid having to spend hours at it. Here too, there are really several models on the internet that you can drop either on top of the machine or on the side, depending on what you want. And that's it. Once you're going to print all this, I think you actually have the basic improvements and optimizations for your 3D printer, and especially the Ender-3. Personally, for it to be a little more harmonious, I reprinted the screen cover in black and here is the result. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you want a part 2 on 3D printer improvements, especially for the Ender-3, as I have many ideas to make it quieter. Feel free to check my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video. This is Team One Fire, peace out.